we can catch them up. I am going to just go to the East Middle Outer presentation. Hang on 1 second for me, okay? Just over there. Okay, so thank you again for joining. My name is Gretchen Flores, and I'm with the Planning, Design, and Development Department for the City of Charlotte. We also have additional staff on the call. We have Kathy Cornett and Robin Byers from Planning, Design, and Development Department. So thank you, Alexandra, for joining us. This is the community conversation for the East Middle and Outer, North Middle and Outer, South Middle and West Outer geographies. Today, we have one participant specifically for the East Middle Outer, so the bulk of the presentation will be regarding that geography. The remainder of the geographies can also be found on our website as individual meetings on their own. So for today's presentation, we're going to be covering the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map and the Charlotte Streets Map. Just some housekeeping. We have a small group, but if you can please remember to mute your microphone when you're not speaking to reduce the background noise, and only use one source of audio. Meetings are being recorded, and so the chat will be also saved at the end of each session. And we are a very intimate group today, but if you can please remember to just be cognizant of your fellow participants. And that's so that we capture the conversation clearly on the recording. For today's agenda, again, it's going to be split into two parts. The first part is an informational overview, and then the second part is intended to be a community conversation. So for the informational overview, we'll be covering what the purpose of the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map and the Streets Map is, and then what the two draft maps are, and then how they relate to each other. And for the community conversation, we'll review a draft of the 2040 policy map recommendations, and then we'll actually look at the maps to discuss any additional steps for our mapping approach, whether that needs to be changed or adjusted. Getting right into the informational portion, what is the purpose of the two draft maps? So the purpose of the 2040 policy map, along with the streets map and the Unified Development Ordinance, is to implement the vision of the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So the 2040 Comprehensive Plan is the vision for our growth through 2040. It's got a number of components, as we just said. The 2040 Policy Map covers land use and form. The Strategic Mobility Plan, along with the Charlotte Streets Map, covers mobility. So how are we getting around the city? And then the Unified Development Ordinance covers actual development regulations. It combines all of the development regulations that we have for the city into one central document. So as I said before, the two maps, the 2040 Policy Map and the Charlotte Streets Map, relate to each other in the sense that they both are geared towards informing our built environment. Again, the 2040 policy map covers land use and form, so where your uses are and what the form and design of the sites and buildings look like. And then the Charlotte Streets Map covers mobility, which is everything from pedestrian to vehicular, and how you get around, what the streets look like, etc. So what are the two draft maps? Before we get into that, let's talk about what makes up a street. What you see on your screen is what we call a cross section, and that's what's going to be regulated by the Charlotte Streets Map. If you read the screen from right to left, from left to right, you'll see all of the components that we typically find in the street. Now, it's important to note that not every street has all of these components, but most streets have a combination of at least two or more of these. So let's look at what the components look like. So component A is the center space, and that typically serves as either a crossing point for pedestrians or turning point for vehicles. Component B is your travel lane, so most streets are going to have that. Component C is the bike facilities, so your bike lanes. D is your curb and gutter. Not all streets have that, but in Charlotte, most streets do, at least most arterials do. Component E is your amenity zone or your planting strip. That's typically where you find your street trees and your grass strip. And then component F is your pedestrian facility. And that's typically your sidewalk. In some streets, you'll see the bike and the pedestrian facilities combined as a multimodal path, and that's usually when you see your sidewalks at 10 feet or more. It's also important to note what a streets map is not, and it is not a priorities map. So it won't give you a list of projects or prioritize those or give you any information on funding. So the streets map, again, is the mapped vision for Charlotte's future multimodal street network. And this covers mainly the arterial roads. You're not going to find your very small local roads on here. It's a key implementation tool for the UDO, and it shows expected multimodal cross sections for all arterials. So it'll give you information on the street classification, whether it's a main street, an avenue, a boulevard, et cetera. It'll give you the number of lanes that are anticipated on that street, and then it'll give you whether or not it has a bike facility. We've come up with an online comment application for the streets map and the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map. And you can find the link in the chat. So I'll give you just a brief overview of what you'll see if you go to the application to comment on it. You will, once you open up the app, you will see the streets map and the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map layers. To the left-hand side, you'll see your comment buttons. If you click on one of the comment buttons, you'll see a comment box come up, and it'll ask you for the street and location that you want to comment on. It'll ask you whether you agree with the recommendation of what that street or place type is, and we'll cover what place types are a little bit in just a few slides. And you can see the information that's displayed once you click on a street, for example, right in the middle of this screen. It'll give you the street name, the cross section and description, and it'll give you some notes and some additional information on it. Once you're done filling out all the relevant information for the comment that you'd like to leave, you can hit save and it'll close it out automatically. There's also a how-to demonstration video on our website if you want step-by-step instructions on how to leave a comment. And we can either drop it on in the chat, or I believe if you go to the application, there's a link to it automatically. So let's cover now the bulk of what this presentation is, and that's the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map and what that is. So it is a translation of the comprehensive plan's base type policies to a specific geography. So our comprehensive plan gives you the policies, and then this map, the Future 2040 policy map, is intended to be a companion to that, and it's supposed to be sort of the visual translation of what is in the plan. It is intended to provide citywide direction for balancing future needs and opportunities, to protect priorities while providing opportunity for growth, align future growth with infrastructure capacity. So, we don't want to be planning for future growth where there's no opportunity for infrastructure or the expansion of infrastructure. And then it improves access to any underserved areas that may have been historically disenfranchised. Sorry. How was the 2040 policy map developed? We used a tool called place types, and we followed a 3-step process, basically. So the place type tool is basically a designation that provides guidance for the mix and proportions of land uses, the building form and design, mobility and parking, and then your open space. A traditional land use plan typically only has, it only gives you land use and density. By comparison, place types are much more comprehensive in that they give you a mix that, of things that you really want to do to make a place livable, walkable, and enjoyable. We developed the place type tool using a three-step process, and we'll get a little bit more into this in the next few slides. But essentially, the first step was to map any existing development. Then we overlaid that map with our adopted policies from 2010, which are usually our area plans. And then the last step was to map the policies in the 2040 plan and then see what that difference was. So the 10 place types that were adopted in the plan, you can see here, fall into three categories. They are either a live category, a work category, or a play category. In your live category, you have your neighborhoods 1 and 2. So those are your very residential areas with some mixes. And then adjacent to that, we have parks and preserves, which is really where you want to have your large or open areas so that your neighborhoods can access them. In your work category, you have your traditional commercial, your campuses, innovation, mixed use, and then your manufacturing and logistics. And then in your play category, you have the neighborhood centers, your community centers, and then your regional activity centers. And let's take a look at a little bit closer what those really mean. So your neighborhood 1 is your traditional lower density single family homes. They may have some small multifamily homes or accessory dwelling units. So that's your mother-in-law suites, what they're typically known as. Your neighborhoods 2 have a little bit higher density, and those provide a variety of housing, such as townhomes and apartments, along with some neighborhoods serving shops and services. So you're very low intensity commercial, like maybe a cleaners or a very small local store. The neighborhood centers are your small scale walkable mixed use areas. Those are typically, again, embedded in neighborhoods, and they provide your convenient access to goods with some dining and very, very small retail. Your parks and preserve are typically exactly that. They're your open spaces for recreation. Community centers are, by comparison, larger than your neighborhood centers, but they're mid-size. And again, mixed use and typically found along transit corridors. So they again provide access to goods, services, and entertainment. Your commercial areas are what you think about when you think about older commercial areas. So they're primarily accessed by car, and they're typically retail and very single use in that sense. There's no mix of residential or anything like that. Your campuses are a cohesive gathering of buildings, typically, for institutional purposes. So your schools, your hospitals, and office parks. Innovation mixed use are typically used for employment in older urban areas. So they include things like light manufacturing, research, and some retail and dining. Manufacturing and logistics are what you think about when you think about employment areas with a large range of jobs and wage levels. So think about your production, manufacturing, research, distribution, and logistics. I typically think about your Amazons in this category. And then your regional activity center are the largest by comparison, and they're very high density, very mixed. They typically are along transit corridors. They have access to goods, dining, office, entertainment, as well as residential. So again, going back to how the 2040 policy map was developed, these are the 3 steps that we used. The existing development, we mapped that using existing land use and then our forms of development. So anything that's on the ground is what we use to map the existing development map. The second step was to map the adopted policies. So that for that we use the future land use, any zoning that's in place, and then any market support that we could find. So again, that includes our future land use and zoning also include the adopted policies through from 2010. And then the final step is the Charlotte future policies found in the 2040 comprehensive plan. And for that, we use the equitable growth framework, which sort of falls into 4 categories. And we'll again go into that a little bit later in the presentation. Our plan policies, which are actually adopted in the 2040 plan. And then we use survey responses as our inputs. And we used a few checkpoints to make sure that we were mapping things correctly. We used some growth projections, which we can cover for this geography. So we used infrastructure and environmental capacity, and then we used market feasibility. So this covers your east, middle, and outer geography. And we can go right into the existing and adopted policies and what that looks like for this map. So with existing development, you can see that the map here shows a large amount of yellow, which is your neighborhood 1. This is what's on the ground today. And you can see some red and orange along Independence and Albemarle. And that it signifies your older commercial and then your neighborhood 2, which is typically a little higher density residential. When we overlaid the adopted policies, which are the policies adopted from 2010, this is the map that we get. You can see a significant decrease in campus land use, and then a decrease in your parks and preserve, and then your commercial, as well as some manufacturing and logistics. And then we increased the neighborhoods 1 and 2, so your residential uses. And then there's a significant increase in the acreage in innovation mixed use, and then your neighborhood and community centers. So this map signifies what the city would look like in this area if we did absolutely nothing else and then just continued with growth based on the policies that we adopted in 2010. So next we're going to cover the several different policies that were adopted in the 2040 policy in the 2040 comprehensive plan, which go into preservation policies and then the equitable growth framework. So for the preservation policies, think of these as policies that are intended to protect certain land uses, or excuse me, certain place types. And those 3 place types are your neighborhood 1, your manufacturing and logistics, and then your parks and preserve. So this is what we started with. This is the baseline map. Once we mapped the changes from the adopted policies, you see a decrease in neighborhood 1 and your manufacturing and logistics, but an increase in your parks and preserve. So there's supposed to be polling questions for this, but we're going to skip that and we're just going to go through the presentation. The next set of sort of policies that we mapped were related to the equitable growth framework, and those are split into the next 4 areas. The first is the access to housing opportunity. And really what this is looking at is where there are gaps in housing opportunity. So where there is a lack of unit diversity, where there's an issue with housing costs or housing size, whether there's subsidized housing tenure, and then if there is a level of reinvestment or not. So anything outside of the hashed area is an area where there is a gap in the access to housing. So there's typically little to no access to housing as it relates to these 4 metrics. So once we map the changes from the adopted policies, you can see that the neighborhood 2 is the place type that typically would increase your access to housing, and that went up by 9%. And then this is what, when we map the 2040 policies, what the map looks like. So there was an increase overall in about 9% for that place type intended with the intent to bridge the gap for housing access. The next area is the access to employment. And again, these, anything outside of that hatched area are areas where there's a gap with access to employment. And the metrics that we use to come up with that is what's the proximity to employment? What is the employment in the community shift? So how far do you have to drive from where you live to where you work? Your wage levels, middle skilled job availability, and then the knowledge-based job availability. And we do that by mapping the manufacturing and logistics. And you can see when we do that, there's a decrease in campus place type, but there's an increase in the innovation and mixed use category. And this is the final map that results from that. The third category is your access to essential amenities and goods and services. So this is our base map, and anything outside of the hatched area, again, signifies a gap in the access to amenities. And the way that we measure that is we ask ourselves, what's the proximity to childcare and early childhood education? Location of parks, open space and trails, your community facilities, access to fresh food and healthcare, and then your financial services and access to internet. So the way that we plan for that is we start to map the activity centers, basically. So your neighborhood and your community centers. For this particular map, there's no regional center. But you can see that there's an increase in your neighborhood and your community center, and then a decrease in the sort of the older commercial areas, which makes sense when you think about that adding access to goods. And this is what the resulting map is overall when we, the aggregate basically of all of the place types. In general, we see a decrease in the commercial campus, manufacturing and logistics, and then your neighborhood 1. And there's an increase in the neighborhood 2, parks and preserve, and then your activity centers as well as innovation mixed use. So the last category is the environmental justice. And what this really signifies is any areas outside of the hatched area have a gap for environmental justice. And the way that the things that we use to measure that is, what's the tree canopy, what's the impervious surface in these areas, what's the proximity to heavy industrial uses, and what are the uses that are bordering those industrial uses, and then proximity to major transportation infrastructure, and whether or not there's any environmental features like floodplain. So we looked at growth allocations to just sort of check make sure that we were mapping things correctly. And in terms of the number of jobs that are being, housing units that are being created that are being envisioned with the growth of the city. Around this area encompasses around 13,370 households of that total growth, which is around 9% for this specific geography. And then in terms of jobs, this area is expected to receive around a little over 4,000 jobs, which is about 2% of the total growth for jobs in the city. So, Alexandra, I know that you sort of just wanted to listen in a little bit more on this conversation, not necessarily because of your location, not necessarily participate. Was there anything that you maybe wanted to ask or cover? I think now would be a good time to just talk about.
Actually,
those
this
sort of
past
questions.
in the summertime, I filled out the survey for the place types. So I did do
Okay.
the survey.
Okay, you
Yeah.
did. Okay.
I did. Yeah. And so I guess my question, well, going back to that, the part about the access to amenities.
Yeah, let's go back to that map.
I mean, the categories for it are pretty wide. So
you mean the metrics?
Yeah, the metrics are, it's pretty wide, right? Like, so
Yeah.
childcare, and so how, so I guess how will you address those specific metrics when you're looking at a map that's all, that's covering so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we say metrics, I think these are the things that we looked at to measure whether or not there were gaps. In terms of this particular, a second, let's see. The way that we address that, and Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what we did was we mapped these neighborhood centers, which are really intended to be mixed uses, so that we can capture or we can provide an opportunity for development of all of these uses listed on here, or all of these metrics, basically, in these activity centers.
So the goal is to touch on those all on each category in the future.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Gretchen. We've used several of these metrics before and over the past 20 plus years, and what we would call then our general development policies. And so where there wasn't specific guidance, you would apply these general development policies. But the problem, or not the problem, but the focus of that was not distributing it. It was more like if these things were there, then that qualified for more intensity of development. In applying the equitable growth framework, we're trying to provide both the opportunities for growth and the benefits of growth, and kind of share the responsibilities and some of the other things that come with growth citywide. So yes, all of these metrics are important to accessing amenities, but not all of them can be. It's a multifaceted. Right. Access to amenities is multifaceted, like pretty much all of these metrics are. So the ones that we felt like we could address through the place type mapping process are the ones that are underlined in that list. The other ones will require other approaches, perhaps like specific programs. Maybe there's capital improvement projects or infrastructure projects that need to happen, those kinds of things. So just because they're not addressed in this specific mapping process that we're doing right now doesn't mean they won't be addressed in other areas of the comprehensive plan implementation process, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And sorry about that, Gretchen. Shut bopping in there.
No, please, that was perfect. The other thing that we have, the other step that we have after the policy map is adopted and the UDO is adopted, and that all goes through, is the community area plans, which will look at very specific areas and because what may work for one area won't work somewhere else. So that's another step that we have, and that'll come after the policy map is adopted as well. So Alexandra, we have polling questions to ask, but it seems, and I don't want to be inefficient or ineffective with time. So no, sure. Is there something that you want to cover specifically, or do you want to just go through the polling questions and then we can just talk about them since it's just us four on the call? But we can just sort of talk about what the polling questions are and just sort of get your feedback.
I think whatever would be more effective for you and your team would be better, because I think it would just work out better that way.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
I wasn't
we'll
aware
go-
I was the only one.
Well, we had a number of people, but I think just due to the time and the day, I think, yeah. That's fine.
No problem.
All right, so why don't we go through the polling questions, and then we can just have a conversation about them. And then if at the end, if there's anything else that you would like us to cover, we can do that, because I think we have time.
Okay.
Let me get to,
I'm gonna put the polling questions in the chat,
yeah.
just to be the easiest.
Yeah, so these are the 5 polling questions, and again, we can just have a conversation about them, but, 1 second, let me just minimize my screen. Okay, so the first polling question, and these questions are geared towards our mapping approach to get your opinion of whether or not how we were approaching coming up with these maps, whether or not you agree that it's an effective way or a good way to do that. So the first question is regarding preserving your neighborhood 1 and your parks and preserve. And the question is, do you think that the mapping step to preserve neighborhood 1 and parks and preserve aligns with the Charlotte Future 2040 plan's direction to protect community assets? And I think this one is just, agree, strongly agree.
I would say agree.
Okay.
I read some of the plan, and so I know that like green space and maintaining the charm of Charlotte is a priority. So
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Okay. The next question is in regards to improving access and to housing diversity. So in your opinion, is mapping more neighborhood 2 in areas with low access to housing opportunity a good approach to increasing housing diversity in the future?
agree.
Okay. So much. Access to jobs. Is mapping campus and an innovation mixed use in areas with low access to jobs a good approach to increasing job access in the future? So campus, if you remember, is your groupings of buildings for institutional uses, and then your innovation mixed. Yeah, and then your innovation mixed use is like your if you think about your sort of mixes of where you find research but also retail and all of that.
Can you give me an example of that in Charlotte, like a neighborhood?
Yeah, I would say innovation mixed use is probably, I don't know if you know the northern end of the city, but I would think campus, I'm sorry, Camp North End, I think is in that category because it's
the optimal, what is it called?
Optimus Hall.
Something like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. Because Optimus Hall typically has just your retail and dining.
What was it in a research?
Office
Was it
component in it now, I think.
I think it was funded by a corporation. I think. So if there's office space, then it counts as an innovation mix, correct?
That's a good question. Hang on 1 second. Let's go back to the description of that.
Yeah, I think that really it's I think that Optimus Hall is probably a good example because that was a former textile location that so it was an industrial use, and it's there's not the demand for that particular use anymore. So it transitioned into more of a mixture of uses that includes retail and entertainment component. And I think there is like the bottom level that's closest to the light rail station does have, it's either an office component or it might be one of those like WeWork type, not WeWork, but one of those type.
Yeah,
facilities.
like those,
Yeah, and also a lot of South End, if you're familiar with that. Now, you have some of it is close to transit stations, but the portion, and I don't know how familiar you are with it because you're so far away, but there's a portion that's kind of right outside of the walk shed of the transit stations. And where, originally it was just Old Mecklenburg Brewery, and then it's really evolved into, that was all manufacturing type uses and uses that a lot of them were distributive manufacturing because they were close to that heavy rail line, but that heavy rail line really doesn't have any use any longer, kind of transitioned out of that. So then there's not the need to locate those uses there any longer. And so they've then again transitioned into something different. So really the intent of the light industrial mixed use is to provide, recognize that that is something that's happening in our community. You can't always predict exactly where that's going to be. So it offers the opportunity, kind of the flexibility for those things to happen and still retain that employment component when possible.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the areas like where Olmec it still retains some of that industrial character, which kind of makes it fit in nicely
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how it developed.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
Kathy.
yeah, so I guess I would, so for the answer, I would agree.
Okay.
Would agree.
So moving on, your access to goods and services is mapping your activity centers in areas with low access to goods and services a good approach to increasing access to goods and services in the future?
Can you remind me of the definition
Yeah.
again?
Yes, so your activity centers are your neighborhood, and your regional activity centers. So that has a combination of uses, basically. They're typically along transit lines, and those are where you find your retail, dining, residential, sort of mixed all in together.
Okay. Sure, I agree.
And then in your opinion, how important do you think that it is to explore additional tools to further mitigate environmental justice impacts during the community area planning process?
Very important.
Yeah, that's typically what we get folks. Okay, so we have one more set of polling questions, and those are 3. So for these polling questions, we heard from some stakeholders that some of the existing manufacturing and logistics sites, especially those that are closer to uptown, may be better suited for either other uses due to the changing needs of the manufacturing industry, or to some extent placed elsewhere. So the question is it more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics sites, or to consider where to repurpose these areas in the city to better serve community needs?
So I know that the Charlotte Regional puts out data for like economic growth for the quarter and that sort of thing. And so I know that I know manufacturing is really important, is a big component of Charlotte, and is specifically Latinos. And so for me, the concern is that access to affordable housing and the location of it and where the jobs are for people that have a hard time commuting to work.
Right.
So I'm with this question, I would say, like, where would you be putting these manufacturing locations?
Right.
How far are they from affordable housing and areas that normally, because I know areas that normally have Latinos, in the community.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a concern for me.
Yeah, and that's a very valid concern. It's a very good question. So one of the overarching sort of goals is to place any housing and affordable housing specifically along transit lines to address that specific concern on where your affordability is, and making sure that people can access transit and get to their jobs from where they live. Yeah, it's a very good question. Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. So the next sort of feedback that we heard was regarding the neighborhood too. There's a lot of large single-family lots located along major transportation corridors in the city, and these sites could evolve eventually to neighborhood 2, which is your a little bit higher density residential, to provide more housing options in the future. So the question here is it more important to preserve existing single-family lots or to provide more housing options along major corridors?
And for the neighborhood too, is there a variety in regards to affordability with what's being made,
In terms of numbers or the types of units?
the types of units?
Yeah, so this is where you find the largest mix of unit types that are that can be developed basically. So you've got your your single family maybe developed within this, but largely your townhomes and apartments, and that's typically where we see a lot of the affordability coming in.
Okay. But I imagine a lot of neighborhood 1 people normally wouldn't want that, correct? Like wouldn't want it changing over.
Yeah,
But
I
know
mean, there's always some of that.
Yeah, my parents live in a neighborhood 1.
Yeah.
But they live in a dead end, like
Right.
close area. So I think for them,
Yeah, there's always some of that, but there are folks that recognize that there's an affordability issue, and so they're able to see the larger picture. So
yeah.
okay.
For me personally, I think
Yeah.
affordable housing is more important.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then the last polling question is regarding commercial, and this is the older commercial areas that are typically single use or like your older strip malls. So a lot of the existing commercial development throughout Charlotte doesn't align with the comprehensive plan's vision for walkable and integrated communities. And the question is, how important is it that commercial places in the community planning area evolve into neighborhood activity centers? And that is your more walkable mixed uses.
Yes, I think that's important.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So if you'd like, if you wanted to, and I know that this is probably a little bit difficult for you because because of your location, but if you want to talk about a specific area on this map, we can do that on any adjustments that you think would need to be made in terms of the methodology that we've used. So do you think that there's areas where adjustments need to be made on the map, or any concerns on the map and the place types themselves?
I think it's hard for me to do that
unless okay, that's okay.
Unless how walkable anything is.
Understood. Yeah. Okay, so then why don't we take some time and maybe just talk about any questions that you have or any other items that you may want to cover. You have about 12 minutes.
Anything that could. Okay, I did have one question. So I know for my class, I was doing research on the farmers market paper that came out recently from the city, that they did a study. And so the idea of like how farmers markets are not necessarily being placed in food deserts or food insecure areas in Charlotte. And I don't know how that would fit into the future plan, but is that going to be something to discuss?
Well, I think that the overarching goal is to mitigate any food or eliminate any food deserts, right? So if that's a tool that we can use, it would be a point of discussion, most likely when we start doing the community area plans, because again, what may work in one community won't necessarily work in another. So that's really when we get down, at that point is really when we get down to very specific areas in specific places or geographies in the community. But there is an overarching goal in the plan to eliminate or mitigate food deserts.
Okay.
So the answer is yes.
And then how will you be deciding between what fits into one neighborhood? It won't be the same way that it'll happen in another neighborhood. How does that get decided? And how much, like, I guess, neighborhood input is there?
Yeah, so it'll be heavy neighborhood input. As we did with the comp plan, we'll go out into the community and really engage them and ask, and the methodology for this has not been developed yet, I don't think, because it's got to happen after the policy map gets adopted. But that'll have heavy community engagement as well, where we'll go out and ask the community, what are your concerns? You know, what are specific areas that concern you, or topics that concern you, and what would you like to see? And then we can go back to the comp plan and say, okay, this is what the comp plan recommends. These are the tools that we can look at, and does that work in this particular area?
And when you're talking about the area, is it based on like how you named like the east, north, or is that the specific?
Yeah, let me go back to the geographies map. So there are 15 geographies, and I'm sorry, this is probably making me dizzy, but I'm just trying to get to the map.
So there'll be 15 neighborhood
Yeah.
plans.
Yes, hang on one second for me. Let me just get you back to the geographies map. So if you can see, this is the overall map, and I don't have the other geographies layered on here, but basically, you know, we have I believe this is one geography here. Then the sort of northern portion, there's a west outer, which we would have covered today. There's a geography here. I can send you the link to the map that shows all the 15 geographies. And then, you know,
Okay.
these are, there's several different ones in this ring, and then sort of central and then southern for the city.
Great. And then my last question is, so I'm trying to get my parents to be more active participants.
Yeah, are they
And-
Spanish speaking?
Yes. So that was
Okay.
my question. How are you offering, if you're offering that information only in Spanish?
We have several videos on the website in Spanish that cover the plan and then the mapping effort. And then we will have one I want to say there may be one engagement opportunity towards the end in Spanish. We haven't finalized that yet, but if you, are they computer savvy, or would they be getting their information through you?
Through me.
If they listen to Hola News, we have some information that's disseminated through Hola News, and then there's another avenue, and I can email you resources directly, and typically Alberto Gonzalez and then myself and Maria Florin handle the sort of the Spanish engagement piece in the office. So I can get you in contact with, I can get you the resources that you need.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Was there
That's it?
anything else?
Oh,
Okay.
nope, that's it. That's
Okay.
meaning.
So let me take you back to the next step so that you're aware of what's coming up next. So this engagement window will be active through November 10th. And then all of our sessions are on the website, and you know, depending on what COVID does, we may have some in-person opportunities as well, and that'll all be on the website. You know, things are changing pretty quickly. So if your parents are like my parents, they like to just go and like be in person, that's just keep an eye out for that, because there may be some opportunities for them in person.
Great.
The comment application, if you're interested, is open through November 14th. And then we will have a second draft of the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map is expected in early of 2022. And if you have our website, that's the best way to keep up.
Great.
Kathy or Robin, do you guys want to add anything that I may have left off?
No, I think that's good.
Great.
I think the only thing that we would add is just the comments on the interactive web map. That might be good for you to look at, just because you can look at that when it's not 11:30 at night.
Yeah.
Midnight at this
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday
thank you.
night for you.
Thank you for sharing, even though it's an audience of one. I greatly
No, of
appreciate
course, absolutely. And I'll get you, I'll email you the contact and the
Yes,
resources
please.
for the Spanish portion.
Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.